Imagine opening your door only to see children standing there with lifeless eyes. So I'm truly terrified of black-eyed children. Black-eyed children are paranormal creatures that are said to resemble children 6 through 16. They have pale skin and black eyes. And when a reported encounter happens, you have to actually invite them in order to be in any danger. So how did this legend even get started? Well, tabloids have been covering the tales of these sightings since the 1980s. The biggest source who is indicated to have started this on the mainstream happened in 1996, in which a Texan reporter by the name of Brian Bethel had 2 alleged encounters with black-eyed children. So Brian was sitting outside of a theater in his car in Abilene, Texas, when he got a knock on his glass window. There was 2 boys there who seemed to be around the ages of 9 and 12, and they were both wearing hooded sweatshirts. He opened the window a crack, and they asked if they could have a ride to their mothers. He described one of the boys as being olive-toned with curly hair, and the other one red-headed with freckles and very pale. He stated that as they were talking, he felt a sense of dread come over him, and he told them that he wouldn't make it back in time for his movie. However, the second he said this, they pushed even harder. They started saying things like, "We're just kids, we don't have a weapon or anything," and that's when he noticed that their eyes were completely black. He told the boys no, and that's whenever they started to knock on his door harder, saying, "We can't come in unless you tell us to." He then drove away and noticed from the rearview mirror that the boys were completely gone. So this was the foundation to the black-eyed children story. But this would not even be close to the last. Go to part 2. So how does one of the largest police investigations in Britain history relate to black-eyed children? So the next really significant sighting of black-eyed children happened in Cannock Chase, England. A woman and her mom were out for a walk whenever they heard a scream and saw a child walking in the distance. They could hear the child sobbing, and when they approached her to ask her if she was okay, she had her hands covering her eyes, and whenever she removed her hands, she revealed black eyes underneath. She then grabbed her daughter and jumped back, and by the time they did that, the girl had just disappeared. And years before, the police were actually led on a chase near that area for a girl with black eyes who was running through the woods by herself after someone reported her being there. And the police search showed up nothing. But Cannock Chase had made headlines in the 1960s for a highly reported case. 3 local schoolgirls between the ages of 5 and 7 had been abducted and murdered. And some say that the black-eyed child that lives over there is the ghost of one of those girls. But this still doesn't explain the thousands of sightings that have popped up around the world. So who or what are the black-eyed children? Are they ghosts, demons, vampires? So I'm going to be going into all the theories surrounding black-eyed children on my YouTube, as well as telling you guys more stories about sightings of black-eyed children. And forewarning, they're scary. I'm also going to be peeling this off my face in the YouTube video. I honestly cannot wait to get this off, so go over there and watch. So a lot of people would probably be surprised to know that The Purge was inspired by a true event. So for those of you who haven't seen The Purge, it's a movie about all crime, including murder, being legal for 12 hours straight. It's supposed to be set in this dystopian America, and honestly was like a huge hit. And this has actually been traced back to an ancient Roman festival, which the whole premise of kind of resembles the film. So the festival of Saturnalia would begin on December 17th, and it would always start during sowing season because it was celebrating the Roman god of agriculture, Saturn. The whole thing lasted about a week long, and the only rule was, well, that there were no rules. In terms of partying, the whole experience is described as being very similar to Mardi Gras, in which there was just a ton of booze and absolutely no consequences. But many of the drunken antics were just taken way too far, and people started to use this time to commit theft, vandalize homes, play pranks on one another. Drunken fights would turn into murder, and it was the perfect time to get revenge on someone who had wronged you. And this was not the worst part by any means. The officials were actually in on it, and they would pick a king or queen each year. They would basically just give them the best day ever, let them have festivities, give them a big feast, and let them have, like, pleasurable nights before they would slaughter them on the steps of the Saturn temple in order to make a sacrifice to Saturn. But once Constantine became Christian in, like, 312 AD, this whole festival ended up becoming Christmas. I don't know if you've heard of it, but this whole thing has me wondering, if you had to be in the Purge or something like it, how would you survive it? Go to the next part. So if America turns into a dystopian nightmare, and we all have to purge, how exactly would we be able to survive the purge? I was thinking a lot about this, and this is a really well thought out thought, but the best way to survive the purge would simply be to just be rich. It's as simple as that. But no, really, if you can afford to not being around during the purge, I would get the heck out of there and take a vacation. There are absolutely no rules saying that you can't leave once the purge starts. The issue with this, though, is that there is absolutely no way that a ton of other people aren't going to have that same exact idea. So this is going to potentially cause a lot of air traffic at the airport, flights delayed, so I would recommend, like, getting out weeks ahead of time. I used to think that a high-tech security system would be very beneficial during the purge, but honestly, considering the fact that, like, 55% of all murders are people that you know, such as co-workers, ex-lovers, spouses, I don't know if a security system would necessarily stop them or that you would even, like, register that they're a threat. And the other thing is just to avoid major cities. I feel like the less densely populated, the better chance you might have. So due to that, I honestly just wouldn't even stay home at all, and I also wouldn't tell anybody else where you're going. But if you can't afford to take all that time off from work, I would definitely purchase a boat. There are so many lakes around the US and you could honestly go to any ocean. The only thing would be to stay far away from the shoreline. Being far out at a lake, at an ocean, would make you so much harder to reach. But the thing is, like, don't go to the same lake or ocean each year. Like, switch it up. You don't want someone tracking what you're doing. If you can't afford a boat or you're far away from lakes or oceans, another option would be the forest, which sounds absolutely terrifying and creepy to be in the middle of a forest during this, but it blocks your line of sight and it also helps to muffle sound. And if absolutely none of this is an option and you live in a very densely populated city, I would recommend just hiding in a dumpster. If you actually decide to participate in the purge, which I highly recommend that you don't because it doesn't seem like a lot of people come out of that okay, definitely wear a mask because that will hide your identity the next day so that people don't know that you participated. And if you guys are curious on not only how to beat the purge, but actually get rid of the purge entirely if it ever were to happen, come over to my Instagram reels because I'm going to be talking about it over there. I can't find a bat, so I have a stick. Happy purging. Am I the a-hole for kicking my brother-in-law out after he referred to himself as the father of my child? Let me explain. I'm a 30-year-old female and my wife is a 29-year-old female. We welcomed our son into the world a year ago and both of our families are very accepting of us, but my wife's family has this weird obsession with passing on the family genes. So this made adopting out of the question very early on. My wife and I always wanted to start a family, but things got difficult when my wife found out that she was infertile. We knew that her family would be understanding, but I am terrified of pregnancy. My biological mom died in childbirth, which has led me to believe that I wouldn't hold a pregnancy very well. After a few months of brainstorming, my mother-in-law suggested that we do IVF, using my eggs, my brother-in-law's sperm, and let my wife carry the baby. Even though I was skeptical, I gave in because the plan hit all the marks. Her family got to pass on the genes, and my wife and I got to start a family. Plus, I didn't want to carry the baby. We went through extensive counseling and therapy to make sure everyone was on the same page and could handle it, and everything went great. My wife loved being pregnant aside from the morning sickness. And we were overjoyed to welcome our new baby boy in the winter. But a problem arose when we were preparing for my son's first birthday when my brother-in-law made a comment about how he should get a say in the planning as the child's father. I was shocked, I cringed, and I told him he wasn't. And told him that he was just providing a piece of him, and he looked me in the eye and said, yeah, so he's our child. My wife's jaw dropped and my mother-in-law wasn't making eye contact. I kicked him out of the house and told him that he couldn't come back until he apologized. But he got angry, which made my wife start to cry. She has always struggled with self-esteem, and this infertility really took a toll on her. For months, I've had to reassure her and tell her what an amazing mom she is. My sister-in-law later that day called me the B word, and I argued that my brother-in-law had no right saying any of that. But she kept yelling, so my wife and I had to cut off contact with her family. Brother-in-law signed away all of his rights and agreed multiple times he's just an uncle. But am I in the wrong for waiting for him to apologize?
I secretly hate my husband, but I can't leave him. Disclaimers in on my Storytime listed on Instagram. My husband and I have only been married for 2 months. We dated on and off for almost 7 years. So when he finally proposed, I was actually really happy. The problem is that we never lived together before we got married. He never wanted to move in with me when we were dating. He also had this thing where he wouldn't want me to come to his apartment randomly. He would always schedule times where I could hang out with him at his apartment. This all seems suspicious, but I really wanted to marry him, so I just decided to overlook those things. But now that we're married, I see why he didn't want me to come over and why he had all these strange rules. It turns out that he's incredibly messy, lazy, and is super picky about the food he eats. So now that I'm his wife, I'm constantly having to clean up after him. Every single time he goes to the toilet, he always leaves skid marks, or for some reason, he always has like explosive poop and it goes everywhere on the bowl. So every single time I go to the bathroom after he does, I'm always having to clean it up. And it makes me so angry that I have to clean up after him that I have begun to hate him. Also, he's super picky about his food. We can never go to restaurants because he never wants anything on the menu. And if we ever do go to a restaurant, we have to go wherever he wants. I love all types of cuisine, especially Indian, Mediterranean, Japanese, but he thinks it's gross. He comes from a very American family. He grew up eating chicken nuggets and grilled cheeses. To him, anything with some spice is way too much. That means I can't cook what I want because he always complains about the smell. Thankfully, he's got an office that's 30 minutes away. So when he leaves, that's when I cook. But I have to make sure to air out the apartment before he gets home. I'm always doing his laundry and cleaning up after him. Every single time he shaves, he leaves hair everywhere. I actually hate this man now. I told him that I don't want to live with him anymore, but he freaked out. He's begging for me to stay, but I'm so unhappy. What should I do?